So, welcome to Best Fleets to Drive For, what's working and what's not. My name is Mark Morrell, I'm president of Carrier's Edge, and I am joined today by...
I'm Rick Tucholsky, I am marketing director from Carrier's Edge.
We have been producing the Carrier's Edge program for 16 years now, looking at what's working in fleets, what's not working in fleets, gathering information every year, and talking about that. And I have wanted to do a presentation at Mid-America for a long time now. And I'm very happy to be doing this, but the challenge doing a presentation like this, putting it together in advance, is this show has every part of the industry attending it. So I don't know who's going to be in the audience. Is it company drivers? Is it owner-operators? Is it fleet management people? Is it other vendors? Is it people that are exhausted and just looking for a seat at this time of the day, waiting out until the reception starts? I don't know. So what I want to do is start with getting a sense of who you all are and what sort of thing you're doing. And this will be a lot easier if I don't have this light in my eye, so I'm going to be doing a little bit of this. But can I see a show of hands first? Anybody here that is a professional driver currently, either as a company driver or owner-operator? All right, excellent. Company driver or owner-operator?
Owner-operator.
Excellent. Anybody here that is in fleet management, that works in the office? Okay. Okay, all right. Anybody that's a service provider to the industry, either a vendor, I would count industry association in there. Okay. You guys are vendors.
Oh, you're vendors?
Yes.
I didn't know.
Yes. The ones that everybody stays away from at the party, fellow vendors. We're vendors too, so we know everybody. Yes. So, okay. So we got a good mix, which doesn't make it very easy for us to tailor our content specifically for the audience. So we're going to talk about things and provide some insights from the most recent edition of the program that are going to be as applicable as we can make them for each of your different constituencies. So, first off, I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of the program itself, how it works, why we do it, that sort of thing, which is important so that you understand what it takes for a company to become a Best Fleet to Drive For, and how we end up having so much information about what all these fleets are doing. So, we started this program with the beautiful timing of launching it just before the last Great Recession. And in the summer of 2008, we launched the very first edition of this program. And the objective from the beginning was to recognize the companies that are pushing the industry forward, that are making the effort for their drivers to do something different and do something new. And we wanted to recognize those people that are doing that, but also share what it is they're doing that makes them successful. Because we realized very early on that a lot of the things that successful companies are doing aren't really that difficult to do once you have the idea, once you think of it. So sharing those ideas made it easier for other people to join in that success. We wanted to make it a recognition program that is as widely applicable as possible, so have as many fleets as possible that were eligible to participate. And we wanted to take those stories of success and take them outside of the industry, because we recognize that there is a labor crunch coming in trucking. We may not have a driver shortage today or over the past 6 months, but demographics are not on our side. We need to start bringing more people into the industry from a wider pool. And so we wanted to get the message out that there's some very cool things happening in trucking. So to be a part of this program, all you have to have is a for-hire trucking company operating 10 tractor trailers or more in the US or Canada, or any combination of that. You don't have to be a member of any particular association. You don't have to be a customer of any particular vendor. If you've got 10 tractor trailers or more and you operate in a for-hire or authorized for hire work, you can be part of the program. So very wide eligibility. Tens of thousands of fleets across North America are eligible to participate. The trick, though, is that they have to be nominated by a driver. To start the process, a driver or owner-operator working with the company, leased onto the company, has to nominate the company. Only takes one, so it's really not a high bar. But there has to be one person who puts their hand up and says, this is a great place to work. After that, we go through a fairly intense evaluation process with them. There is a corporate questionnaire that they have to complete, which has over 100 questions on it. After that questionnaire is complete and submitted, we do an interview with them to follow up on that questionnaire, to ask them some further questions, to pull out some of the things that they're doing that they haven't really talked about in their questionnaire, get a lot of information there. And the last part of it is the driver survey. After we have got the information from the company about the efforts that they're making, we talk to the drivers and see what they think about it. And we put all of that stuff together, and at the end of it, we are able to identify the best fleets to drive for. So,
would also say, first of all, you're doing great.
thank you.
But also of course, the goal of the program, it's best fleets to drive for, right? So we want to focus on the experience companies are giving to their drivers. But the policies and programs and approaches that the best fleets winners tend to have in their companies, while they're great for drivers, they also pay dividends to the folks in the office, right? It makes their job easier. It makes safety,
Yes.
fleet managers' jobs easier.
100%.
Right, so all these things. So it actually touches a bunch of different.
So it ends up being not just the best fleets to drive for, but in many cases, best managed, best fleets for women to work for, best fleets for minorities, best fleets for new entrants. It ends up being a whole lot of different things because we've got 100 questions on our corporate questionnaire. We're touching on every part of the company. We'll see as we get into it that we ask about just about everything. And each year when we think of new things, we add them on. It gets harder every year.
So it's no accident that if you start thinking about what's best for drivers, it has this sort of
Drivers are the
knock-on
core
effect.
of everything, and if you can get them sorted out, you're going to have a very good business. So this past year, the most recent edition of the program, we had 117 fleets that were nominated by their drivers. Of those 117 fleets, 72 made it through the questionnaire and interview stage into the point where we started scoring them. And through all of that, we also collected 5,000 driver surveys. So we had 72 companies that had made it through to the finals, each of them answering over 100 questions. Not all of those questions get scored, but we did score an awful lot of them. So we ended up with over 4,000 different questions and responses that we had to score this year to identify the winners. But that gives us a ton of information each year about what's happening in the industry. Now, having done it for 16 years, we can also see how things shift year to year in the industry. What's new, what's an emerging trend, what's developing, all of that stuff. So, when we put it all together, we identify top 20 best fleets to drive for, which are the companies that have the 20 companies that have the highest scores across all of the areas. For companies that make that top 20 year after year after year, we now have a Hall of Fame that recognizes that continued level of excellence. And then the last group of people that we recognize are the fleets to watch, which are fleets that aren't quite there yet, but we can see they've got the pieces in place and it's just a matter of time until they get there. So this past year, these were the 5 fleets to watch. We recognize 5 of them every year. Some of them you may have heard of, some of them I'm sure you've never heard of. Some of these companies we never hear of until they enter the program. The top 20 this year, again, some that you've heard of, some that are regulars here, and some that you've probably never heard of, large, small, every industry segment here. If you go to the website, all of this information is on the Best Fleets website, which I'll show you at the end. And the Hall of Fame, these are all companies that have been a top 20 for 10 consecutive years, or 7 consecutive years, plus an overall win. So we do have some overall winners, and if they were able to be top 20 that many times, deliver that continued level of excellence, they make it into the Hall of Fame. So from that, we also have 2 overall winners out of the top 20, best overall large carrier, best overall small carrier, and new this year we've got a best overall for the Hall of Famers, which we're calling the Stratosphere Award. So We found that top 20 is great, but these are competitive people. They want a chance at an overall award, an overall trophy. So we'll be announcing the overall winners at the Education and Awards Conference, which we're having in a few weeks, coming up very fast on us. And the top 20, all of those people that I put up there, that was announced at the end of January. The overall winners do not know who they are yet. We will be announcing that, unveiling that early April. So every year when we put one of these lists out, we say, here are the people who went through it, and here are the people who won. There are some people, sometimes drivers, sometimes other industry people who say, I was really surprised to see that company on that list. How'd they get there? I've heard bad things about them, or my friend worked there and didn't like them, or I used to work there and they really didn't do well for me. Well, the reality is that makes perfect sense to us. There is no such thing as a perfect company, and there is also no such thing as an absolutely terrible company. All of these companies are great for some people and terrible for others. And while you might look at it and say, well, how'd they get there? I've heard bad things about them. Every single company has drivers who hate them. In fact, every company has drivers or people who don't like them. If we disqualified them based on that, there'd be nobody in the program. So we have to look at all of these different factors together. And when we look at the different categories of things that we look at, these are all of the different things that we evaluate these fleets on. Compensation and benefits, which is usually the number one thing that people are thinking about when they have an issue, or when they're unhappy about something, that's only one of the things that we look at. There's many other industry important, industry-specific things that we look at that drivers need to be thinking about. So, we're going to talk about some of these different things, but you'll see it never really is just about the money. Nobody ever quits a job just for money. People quit a job because there is bad money, but also no other opportunities. And I can tell you, every year, the best fleets are not the best paying companies out there. They never are. They have a range of different programs, they have satisfied drivers, but there's always somebody who will pay better and offer less. And so we have to balance all of those things and put it together to identify who the real best operators are. So, now that we've gone through how the program works, let's talk a little bit about what we found. And I can't remember who was going to take this next part. I think we were both going to do it.
I think we were both going to.
Okay, good. So the first thing that we're going to talk about, thing that we have to look at because it's everywhere, technology adoption. You cannot open an industry magazine, go to a website without hearing about different types of technology, different types of things that are being available for drivers or to help out fleets, all of that kind of stuff. Best fleets are no different. So we have seen a big rush of this technology come in over the past 5 years. There's been a huge number of new things. We've got these AI-based dash cams, we've got AI-based this, we've got driver support, we've got predictive intelligence things, all of these things. And for a while, it was like kids in a candy store. Every fleet has so many different things to try out. And it was nice to consider it, but there is something to be careful of. We have definitely seen pushback from the drivers on this and recognize that not all technology adoption is great. The best fleets have got a very specific way of approaching these things and a very specific way of including drivers in that. And so you had some good conversations with some people about that, about the technology adoption, the pros and cons of doing some different things.
So it's true. One of the other things that I've noticed though recently is that there seems to be like a quickening to technology adoption. 5-7 years ago, there was this flood of tech coming on the market, and fleets generally were kind of reticent. What is this going to do for me? I'm not really sure. I don't really understand how this works. But I would say, I don't know if you would say this is true, but in the last couple of years, that adoption is absolutely becoming quicker.
Yeah. So in the beginning, we would see technology adoption come in, and it would follow a very particular life cycle. We saw this in the beginning when we first started this program, dash cams. Drivers were vehemently against dash cams. If my company puts in the camera, I'm quitting. And we had that for a couple of years. And then it was sort of, a few companies were doing it, sort of grudging acceptance among the drivers. Then they get used to it, and then they can't live without it. And it was the same thing with the, what was at the time, ALBRs and E-logs, now ELDs. We're seeing the same thing with dash cams. That is sort of the normal way the technology adoption happens in trucking. As drivers are really not in favor of it, but they get used to it. It's like, oh man, this actually helps me a lot. This is saving my butt. This is making my job easier. Then they don't want to live without it. So it really is shifting
through the stages of grief, right?
yeah, stages of grief, Rick calls it, and I think it's a fantastic way of putting it. That they start with this, well, we're not sure. And so you think about that, not sure, okay, we'll take it, and then we love it. Times the mountain of technology that's come into trucking in the last 5 years. All of the tech bros discovered trucking around 2017, around that time, and they were all dumping all kinds of stuff on you. So kid in a candy store thing, fleets were going nuts with it. What we saw about 2 years ago was really strong pushback from the drivers, like, hold up, there's too much of this, there's no personal connection anymore. Drivers are on the road all week, they're not talking to anybody. The last thing they want is to have those personal relationships replaced by technology. Technology is great as a supporting tool, but not when it takes the place of the personal connection. So the best fleets have realized they've got to find a balance there. We're going to talk a little bit about that and some specifics in a little bit, about the way that they do that, the way they balance those things.
There's something else that the best fleets have figured out. So while the language around technology, sort of fleets are getting more sophisticated, they understand the pitch a little bit more on what's going on, the decision makers aren't necessarily absolutely tech savvy. And so they can be talked into buying a whole bunch of tech that may not be helpful. It may be redundant. It may not actually help optimize or make their fleets more efficient. And so while this process is happening faster, there is an opportunity for them to be taken advantage of by big tech bros coming in saying, let's why don't you just buy this product? And what the best fleets have discovered is if we loop in our drivers in terms of road testing, possible tech, they're finding that the feedback they can get, they can rule out a whole bunch of stuff that just doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
So you get rid of the sales pitch and lean into the knowledge that your drivers already have, and they're opening these communication processes to say, all right, help me in this process of figuring out whether this tech is going to work for us or not.
Yeah, which nicely comes to one of your other great observations, that we have a disconnect sometimes where people have the right idea of the thing that they want to solve, but don't quite get there. They're heading for the exit and then they splatter into the wall beside it. And the best fleets realize that and sort of figure out how to get around it. There's a few specific areas that we found that this year where they got the right idea, but not everybody has the right approach. So we talk about some of those things that you found.
Right, and so when we say best fleets, usually we mean the winners. Within the best fleets program, there are a whole bunch of companies who joined and tried and didn't win. And so I want to talk about some of the things that we learned about those companies and then how the winners are doing things a little bit different. So, for example, we have a question in the program on natural disasters. How do you handle it in your company? And most companies now are saying things like, yeah, so we've got offsite, redundancy. We've got all sorts of backups. Our office folks can work from home. It's fantastic. And when you ask about, well, what do you do for your drivers when it comes to natural disasters? Crickets. What do you mean? They just go and figure it out. And so they're not thinking of things like, preemptive rerouting, right? If you know a disaster is going to happen there, you preemptively reroute your drivers so that they don't go to that place. Within the entire field of participants in the program this year, about 68% of them would preemptively reroute their drivers in case of a natural disaster. When you limit that to just the winners, 100% of them are preemptively routing their drivers, and that would be a minimum for them. They're also thinking about they have funds and guaranteed pay in case you got to pull drivers off the road, a whole set of different things. And so the right topic, dealing with natural disasters, fantastic. Folks that weren't on the winners list were kind of missing the mark, forgetting about what it is for drivers, whereas the best fleets themselves, the winners, are really thinking about, okay, how is that going to impact my...
Now, I want to just take a second to mention that seems like a really obscure issue. Why do we care about what happens with drivers during natural disasters? But the reality is that there's two parts of that that tell us a lot about the fleet. First of all, natural disasters aren't weirdo things that only happen once in a while. They're annual things. Every fleet that we talk to deals with a natural disaster at some point every year, whether it's a flood, whether it's hurricane, whether it's tornado, whether it's forest fires, whether it's ice storm. They're dealing with all of that stuff all of the time. So it's a regular part of the operation. The second thing is that's one of those areas where it tells us a lot about how much thought the company is putting into really taking care of the drivers and making sure drivers have everything that they need. Because if they've got to that level, they've covered the basics of operations, they've covered a lot of the other things that we're going to talk about, but getting that to that level, we're thinking, oh, we're dealing with natural disasters on a regular basis. What are our drivers doing? How are we handling that for them? That tells us an awful lot about the level of detail and how finicky they are about taking care of their drivers. And as Rick points out, it is one of those things that the top 20 have really figured out.
And this is not limited to, say, big fleets with lots of admin and process and things like that. It's more of an approach to the business. So I remember interviewing one company. They had maybe 60 trucks, and they were saying, I think they were up north, and they were saying, last year there was a cold snap, and they had almost minus 50. And the owner that I was talking to said, we just pulled our drivers off the road. We kept paying them, we just pulled them off the road. And that was just his fundamental approach to the business and to his drivers. And so anyone can do it. It's not limited to, you don't have to have a giant budget.
Yeah, we have 15 truck companies that can make it onto that list because they're thinking about it in a particular way.
Right.
Cybersecurity is another one that I also think was really interesting. And it's also one that kind of seems obscure, like why do we care about the drivers? What does that have to do with the drivers? But the reality is quite different, right?
Absolutely right. So when we ask them about cybersecurity, lots of companies will say, again, we've got redundancy. We do training on our admin. Everyone is up to speed. They understand what phishing looks like, and we test them in the office. Fantastic. Well, do you ever do that training with your drivers? Crickets. But the thing is that the drivers, whether or not they're on external systems in the company itself, they've got personal email. They've got all these other internet-based things they're doing, and training them, keeping them up to speed on those best practices. Well, you can imagine that if your driver gets phished and gets hooked, and they lose $10,000 out of their bank account, it's going to affect how they, it's going to affect them, their personal lives, and how they perform the job. So extending that training, it's a very simple thing to do to them, is going to reach into sort of the whole experience that the driver has.
Well, I'll also point out that the first year we added a question about cybersecurity, a lot of the participants in the community gave us grief about it. Why are you asking about that? What's that got to do with the drivers? And I said very bluntly, well, if you get hit by a ransomware attack and your company doesn't operate, that's not a very good place for drivers. If you can't pay them, if you can't dispatch them, it's not a great place for drivers. So we have to look at that. And grudgingly, they've accepted it, and now they've started to do something about it. But it is something that people need to pay attention to. Maintenance is another area which is much more central to the operation, but we still see places where there's a difference between people that sort of have that right idea and maybe haven't figured out all the pieces, and then the winners that really have. And where I see the difference here, we ask questions about what is your, I think it's worded like, how do you minimize or prevent downtime? What are your plans to minimize equipment downtime? And the fleets will give us very lengthy answers about all of the things they've figured out to deal with breakdowns on the road. They've got a contract with Penske, and they've got to deal with TA, and they've got all of these fundamental supports in case something goes wrong on the road. But what they haven't really thought much about is the focus in the shop, specifically in ways that will prevent that. So working with drivers, having drivers and maintenance work together to be more collaborative, to build a more reliable vehicle, to put a more reliable vehicle out on the road. The best fleets have got programs where they incent both drivers and maintenance for clean inspections. They work together on those things. They have drivers getting trained by maintenance on the equipment. They work together. They are taking a lot of effort to make sure that both teams are working together on that vehicle, and it makes a huge difference in the reliability. They don't have the breakdowns on the road. They don't have all of those surprises that take them out of their regular operations. So it's really something to be thinking about. Related to that, equipment specs and the buying cycle. Everybody is focused on getting the right equipment for the kind of freight that they haul, but not everybody collects driver feedback on those things. The drivers are the ones in the field that have great feedback on how that equipment is operating, and we are seeing the best fleets definitely taking the opportunity to get drivers involved in that process. You ask a driver what they want for a truck, yeah, they're going to give you a ridiculous wish list of things that you're never going to order. But the best fleets keep those people in the loop and get that feedback from them about what's working. Here's what we can do. We've got these 4 options. What's going to be better for you? Or why do you think we should pick this one over that one? We are actually starting to see more and more companies that have dedicated equipment specking committees among their drivers. So they'll have 4 or 5 drivers that are part of a specking committee that help the company with those buying cycle plans every year. And that makes a huge difference because you get a much more optimized equipment spend every time.
You actually said something earlier today, not here, about maintenance, and it stuck with me. It was about seeing, when it comes to maintenance, about seeing the driver as a customer.
Yeah.
There's this failure to think about them as someone receiving a service. It's just like, well, just stand on the side, I'm going to fix this truck, just wait, and we'll figure it out when it's done.
Yeah.
You would never treat an actual customer like that.
Right.
But the best fleets are approaching in a way that,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. So one of the other areas that we look at is how companies measure their management team, the effectiveness of their management team, what they do in a couple of different areas. And I put in here activity versus results, because that seems to be the basic difference between what we see across participants in general and how the best fleets are different. And really what it comes down to is, are you measuring the activity of those people, or are you measuring them based on the results of those, the results that they're seeing? The great example, we added a question a couple of years ago that asks how you measure the effectiveness of your fleet managers, and do you include any driver metrics in that? The fleet manager is the driver's #1 point of contact with the company, so presumably the fleet manager's success is the driver's success. So what are you doing to measure the effectiveness of those managers? And what surprised me is the number of companies that did not include any driver-specific metrics in their evaluation of the fleet manager. I don't know how you're measuring the effectiveness of your fleet managers if you're not considering the performance of their drivers. But a lot of them weren't. That was the #1 response. The #2 response was we measure them on productivity. And they gave different numbers for it. So it might be mile production, it might be revenue, it might be percentage of optimization, that kind of thing. But it all came down to productivity, and only productivity. But the problem with that is if you're only measuring productivity, you're effectively incenting those people to push drivers in ways that make them unhappy, make them unsafe, make them quit ultimately. There's a disconnect between the company saying, we care about our drivers, and what they're incenting their fleet managers for. So what the best fleets have started doing, and what they were doing earlier, and we've started to see a lot more adoption of this, is including a broader range of metrics. It will include things like mile production, but it will also include driver retention, safety scores, driver satisfaction. Some of them will be doing actual surveys of the drivers to give feedback on those managers. So it ends up being more of a 360 kind of evaluation for each fleet manager. We've seen them go to the level of saying that the fleet manager is also measured on how much their drivers participate in company activities. Are they staying up to date on their training assignments? What does their maintenance look like for those drivers? And at that level, you can get a really clear picture of who the most effective fleet managers are. You may have a fleet manager who has got tons of mile production, but also has tons of safety issues. That doesn't help the business. And it certainly doesn't help the drivers. So the best fleets are recognizing that and measuring them on a much more holistic package of things that really make a difference to the company. Another example, building on that, we added a question about how companies evaluate the success of their recruiting efforts. And this one I thought was really interesting because I knew that a lot of people were very focused. On the recruiting side, there's a lot of focus on how many calls do you take in and how quick can we get that driver in that truck and how fast can we hire them. That's activity-based stuff. What we saw is there is a lot of that. There's a lot of, we focus on the activity. But the reality is what matters is a successful new hire. So the result is somebody who is still with that company a year from now. And not very many of them were looking at those things. They focus on the activity of trying to get a body there, getting people to show up for orientation, whatever. It was really only a few that were looking at the results. Are you actually hiring somebody who's a good fit for the organization, who sticks around, who's successful? That really is the best practice. It's looking at not so much the activity of the recruiters, but what results are they giving you? Are they bringing in people that are going to stick around for a while? So there's some disconnects there, but there's definitely things that work. Focus on the results rather than the activity there. That sort of highlights some of the different perspectives. That was weird. Different perspectives, company versus driver. So Rick touched on it with the idea of maintenance, looking at maintenance through their own lens of what they're doing and what they need, rather than what life is like for the driver. So we asked, as I mentioned, a question about the downtime and how they do the maintenance and how you prevent all of that. But really what matters to the driver is, do I have a good quality of vehicle that's available when I need it? So these companies would give us a great long answer about all of their maintenance programs, and we do an A service at this point, we do a B service here, we inspect these things at these times. But then at the end of it, I would say, okay, so when you do a regular preventative maintenance, how long is your driver down for? Like, how long are they basically sitting around doing nothing? Oh, 4 hours or so. It's like, so your driver's losing half a day while you do maintenance? That's not really great. Whereas the best fleets, maintenance is done during the driver's off time. Drivers, the ideal situation, the perfect utopia, driver comes in on Friday, drops off those keys, heads home for the weekend, and when they come back Sunday afternoon, Monday morning, pick up the keys, they've got a perfectly maintained vehicle, everything was done over the weekend, but they didn't have to worry about it. There are companies that are not far off of that. We see a lot of the best fleets now that have got 24-hour shops. They're doing that preventative maintenance at night, they're doing it on weekends, or they're solving it in a different way. They put that driver into a different truck and do some local runs. They have some other way of doing it, so that driver isn't inconvenienced. Big difference there in sort of that perspective of the company versus perspective of the driver.
And even if they're not getting it right every time, it's on their radar versus those companies who,
100%. Sometimes they can't do it that way. But if that's the thing they're working towards, that's what makes a difference.
Yeah.
Same thing with shippers. Big issue with shippers, how much waiting time is there for the driver? So the companies will talk about some of the things that they do, and we will penalize this shipper, and we will charge them for this, we'll charge them for that. The driver's still sitting around waiting. That's the thing where there's sometimes a disconnect, whereas the best practice, the best fleets, what they've found is ideally, first of all, you pay the driver very soon. Don't make a driver wait around. The days of 3 hours of drivers waiting around unpaid, those are gone. Even 2 hours is becoming more and more uncommon. Most of the fleets are paying drivers at 90 minutes or 60 minutes, somewhere in that period, and sometimes they pay the driver as soon as they arrive, start paying the driver as soon as they arrive at the delivery point.
what about parking? Same thing.
Same thing with parking. I mean, anybody in this area knows that parking is a big pain. Companies think about it in terms of their routing, in terms of getting shipments delivered. Not that many have figured out that they've got to take care of parking for the driver as well, because the reality is that that's a big issue for the driver on the road in a lot of places. We've seen companies that have gone the route of certainly reimbursing drivers for paid parking, routing them in such ways they can always have parking, or that when the driver gets their load, gets their dispatch, they know where they're going to park and it's already arranged for them. Some of them are doing a lot more drop and hook type stuff, so drivers aren't having to be, well, they're almost doing like relay loads where drivers aren't gone for as many days. There's a lot of ways around that, but the more companies pay attention to it, the better the experience for the driver overall. So, all of that brings us to one of Rick's other great observations, the 3 levels of fleet maturity.
And I think this, I mean, obviously this came out of our work in interviewing companies in the Best Fits program, but I think it captures something that's sort of, across the industry, and that fleets will fall into roughly three groups. And the first group, they do things to drivers. So there's the company and the driver's over there, and they're just going to, you're just going to do what I tell you. I'm going to give you the route. I'm going to, you know, this is what I'm going to pay you. That's it. I'm going to spec a truck, and you're just going to go and drive it. If you're going to come into the terminal, well, guess what? Here's the window. You're going to walk up there, and I'm going to hand you the paper, and you're going to leave again. There's no way you're coming in. At some point, fleets discover, much to their shock, drivers are actually human beings. And they think, all right, well, maybe we should actually be giving them some things. And so suddenly, maybe the window is gone, and now I've got a lounge. And we say, you know, maybe you got some beanbag chairs there, TV, and you got snacks there. But still, right, the lounge is over here. The rest of the business is here. Just be there. I'm going to give you some things, but you know.
Well, they're doing a lot for the drivers. It's the barbecue, it's the giveaways, it's we want to shower you with love, right? We show you, we're highlighting you on social media, all of that kind of stuff, right? But it is still very separated.
And one of the things that they're not doing is asking what they want, right?
Right.
I'm still deciding what it is I'm going to give you, but I'm just going to give you more things. And I'm still not going to ask you what's working for you. And then the third one is when they sort of press this hill and they discover that if they loop drivers into all these business conversations and processes, everything goes better for everyone. So this was a couple of years ago, I was interviewing a small fleet out of Alabama. And this guy, you know, I think he had maybe 20 trucks. But the way he was talking about having his drivers in the conversation for every big decision he made for the business, it was completely natural for him. This was not a large company with a big, you know, HR department. This is one guy who had been in the industry not very long, but his approach to it was, of course I would do this collaboratively with my drivers. Why wouldn't I? And that spirit of doing things with drivers is something that I think is picked up on in a lot of the companies that are on the winners list. Now that's not to say that any given company falls exactly into one of these categories. Right? There's some.
Nobody is sort of a level 3 in every area. There's a lot of different categories, but it is definitely an evolution. And this was one of these irritating things that Rick does where he says stuff and I'm like, oh my God, that is so obvious. Why did I not see that 5 years ago? And cursed him out for it.
Sorry.
But it is exactly encapsulating that evolution that we see fleets go through in different areas. And it might be the one area they've really nailed it, and they're very collaborative with their drivers. They've got a great driver committee. They may be polling drivers on things and figuring out what they want to do for their social events, for their driver appreciation week, for their Christmas parties. They may be very collaborative on that, and maybe in some other areas they haven't really got there yet, so it is more of, we're just going to do this for you. So nobody is all the way there in all categories, but it definitely is a mindset to work towards across different areas of the business. And the people that do that very well have great success.
And so one of the things that they discover is how much better all their other processes go once they do that. If they start with the drivers, well, suddenly they're saving money because they're not making silly tech purchases because they've invited the drivers into that process, like we were talking about earlier. So they've discovered that there's a knock-on effect across the business, across everyone who works in the business, and customers, and all that, if they start with doing things with drivers.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the last section that we're going to talk about today is some driver considerations. So we put this in here because we didn't know what the audience was going to be like. And I know at a show like this, there's a lot of people that are recruiting, and I've seen it year after year at shows like this. Drivers come up to the booth, how much can I make here? That's the first question from the driver. And the fleets are sort of conditioned to start talking about pay, talking about the pay package. And as we saw earlier, there is a lot of things that come into being a really good, successful fleet and a great place to work. So we want to talk about ways to move beyond that conversation. And even though this is sort of an audience that's very broad, in terms of the different things that you're doing, these are still some things to think about, whether it's a driver thinking about a job, an owner-operator just building a business, a fleet management person who is thinking about how they can provide a great workplace for their drivers, or even vendors, things to be thinking about there. So rather than the basic questions about compensation or how many cents per mile on this and how much extra for New York or a border crossing or how much extra for hazmat, these are the things that actually make a lot more difference to the quality of a driver's day. Thinking about who does what, how does the company decide who's doing what in the organization? For all the loads that the company has to get delivered in the course of a week, how do they decide who's doing which one of them? How is that managed? How is the performance managed for their drivers? Who is doing what? How much are they staying on top of that? What's the process for communicating that? And what does the future hold in terms of career development? Ideally, as a fleet manager, you would love drivers to stick around for decades, forever. The last thing you want to be doing is hire new drivers. You can get a batch of them to stick around, that's great. So for the driver, what's in it for them? How does the company make it worthwhile for them to stick around? And as a driver, do you have a say? I mean, one of the themes throughout our conversation today has been driver input. Does the company ask for driver input on things? So what we're going to do is show you some of the questions that we ask in the driver survey specific to those areas, and then we can talk about some of the things that come up and what works and what doesn't, and what drivers think about it. So this is the question about deciding who does what. We ask the drivers, and the driver survey, as much as the company part of it is long and painful to go through the first time, the driver survey is pretty short. It's a bunch of statements, they rate their level of agreement with these statements, and then they can add comments. So this is one of those examples. The company has a fair method of determining who gets what routes. So not asking how they determine it, but you as a driver, do you think it's fair? Do you feel that it's being handled fairly? And I will tell you, every single year that we have done this program, 16 years consecutively now, this question has had the lowest score in the driver survey, across all driver surveys, even at the best fleets. In absolute terms, they have good scores, but relatively speaking, this is always the weakest score. This is always the question the drivers have the most uncertainty about, they have the most question about, and they're not really sure that it's very fair.
This is also the place where companies that are new to this program, they got nominated, they're excited, they're coming in, they do the questionnaire, they do the interview, it's great. But then they realize that we're going to ask the drivers some very pointed questions, and they may get answers that they may not like. They may be under the impression that their drivers were completely happy, and suddenly they get these results back. Oh, actually.
And it might be, in absolute terms, not terrible. It might be that 75% people are happy, think that it's fair, but when every other score is 90%, this one sticks out. So this is one to think about. It is almost always just a communication thing. It's almost always a breakdown of communication where drivers don't understand how the company is deciding this kind of thing. So the second one to share, this is going to the point about how things are managed. How is that managed? How does the company manage performance? Question about, is it clear how the company is measuring that job performance? Not, do you like it? Does it do everything it should? But is it clear? You know, how clear are you on what you're being measured on? And this one also is weaker, not as weak as the other one, but definitely is a weaker question. And we have a couple of others that sort of get that subject of performance management. Here's another one, provides feedback that helps you get better at the job. Is the company doing things with that driver that help them improve their performance? These are the things that companies should be thinking about, and definitely places where we see the best fleets starting to move away from their peers because they are starting to think about these things, having clear definition of the performance objectives, working with people to help them get better at the job, and then I think this is the third one, clear connection on how that ties into performance. So we have a lot of scorecard type things out there, a lot of these point systems, a lot of vendors have got coach programs that have point systems, but making sure that it's clear on how that factors into the compensation can save a lot of problems and can really keep drivers happier with what's going on and get them on side with improving their performance. Presumably, you're incenting the things that you want them to do more of. So if they understand that better, they're going to be able to do it better, better performance for them, better performance for the company. This is the question about what does the future hold? What is the professional development opportunity for that driver? If you want a driver to be there for 10 years, some drivers will be perfectly happy doing the same route every year for 10 years. Fine. If that's what you offer and that's what that driver wants, that's great. But a lot of drivers are going to want to do something different. Maybe they want to move into some different types of equipment. Maybe they want to try running some different parts of the country. Maybe they want to serve some different customers. Maybe they want to move into coaching. Maybe they want to move into management. What is the company doing in that regard? And I'll tell you, this is one of the things that has really grown in the past couple of years as we've seen more people move into more committees and these different types of committees that I was talking about earlier, different ways for drivers to collaborate and get involved, but also with the preponderance of dash cams, all of a sudden you've got all of this footage that are coachable moments for drivers. Well, now everybody needs coaching programs. There's opportunities for drivers to move into a coach program or move into a mentorship and start helping other drivers. So that is something that is going to make a better culture in the business and is going to make drivers happier on both sides of that. They will learn how to get better. This comes back to the performance management, helping get better, and when they get really good at it, they become coaches for other people as well.
And that has developed significantly over the last few years. There was a time when mentoring was just, you're a new recruit, you're in, here's the phone number of a veteran driver, call him.
Absolutely, yep.
Right? And more.
And sorry, I have to stop for a minute because you just reminded me that we have a whole section where we ask about coaching and mentoring programs. And for a long time, that was the answer from a lot of fleets, is that we share phone numbers and they can do something if they want to. That's a great example of that sort of hands-off approach, that sort of disconnect that we were talking about earlier. But now,
and it still
we
exists,
rarely
but
see
now,
that. And certainly in the best fleets in the top 20, we're not seeing that now. We're seeing more, even if it's not formalized. It may not be a lot of documentation, but we know that, okay, after you start, you're going to get put onto this board and you're going to get some special treatment and you're going to have this coach who's going to contact you and they're going to be doing things, and all the coaches get together periodically and compare notes. Even if it's not documented, it's
and
there.
even the most sophisticated ones will ask the recruits, hey, does your mentor suck? They will say, look, give us feedback. And so it's not just the mentor giving us feedback on how you're doing. We want to know if they're actually a good mentor and coach. And so we're going to get from the new recruit, we want that information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So all of that leads into what we've been talking about throughout this, that idea of drivers having a say, being part of the conversation. This is one of those other questions about do drivers feel that they have a say in what the company is doing? Does the company provide ample opportunities for input? And this is one where the responses have steadily gone up over the years as companies find more ways to get drivers involved through town halls, through surveys, through the coaching, through the different types of things that we've been talking about today. This one has gone up a fair bit, but it is definitely an important question for drivers to be asking when they're thinking about a new job, and one for fleets to be thinking about when they're starting to hire. Are these people going to have a say in what's happening? As a driver, do I have a say in what's going on in the business? Am I going to be part of this, or am I going to be separated and outside of it? It can make a huge difference in how successful the company is at hiring and keeping good drivers. All of that stuff, put it all together, and that is what creates the total workplace experience for drivers. That's what we're evaluating, what we're trying to recognize people who are doing a good job of, what we're trying to share tips on. And as you see, there's a whole lot more than the compensation. Yeah, compensation is important. Everybody wants to get paid, and I've yet to meet a person who doesn't want to get paid more than what they are. I would love to meet that person, but I don't think they exist. Compensation is always going to be an issue there, but the reality is that there's so many other pieces that all together create that workplace experience, and that's what we're trying to get people thinking about, get drivers thinking about, and share what's working. So with that, I'll reiterate that we will be sharing way more of this at our Education and Awards Conference in a couple of weeks in Charlotte, unveiling the overall winners. But as a dedicated education conference, which we are doing for the first time, we've got a day and a half where we can do a deeper dive into more specifics of the things that the fleets are doing that work, what companies can be doing with this information, and more of Rick's insights that irritate me because I didn't think of them. And so,
And that's open to even companies who were not in the Best Fleets program.
absolutely,
Here,
any fleet is eligible or welcome to attend that. It is a pretty much vendor-free zone, so it's only fleets that are attending that. So there's going to be a lot of networking with the existing Best Fleets, with the winners, and learning from each other as well. And the website, bestfleetstodrivefor.com or bf2df.com, has all of this information. There's blogs, there's podcasts with the winners, see what's going on.
Oh,
Nominations open. What's that?
it's free.
What?
Not the conference, being involved in the program, right? So,
Absolutely. Geez, didn't I not say that at the beginning?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm saying it now.
Okay, let's go back to slide number 2. So yes, the program is free to participate. There's no cost to be part of this for fleets. There are fleets that join it basically as a benchmarking program for themselves. That's fantastic. It's a great way to go through it, look at what fleets are doing, what you're doing, compare your own activities to what's happening in there, answer some of these questions for yourself, and see, how are we doing on these things? So it is basically a free program to be a part of. We do have a couple of things where there's like some reports you can order that are cost recovery, but it's basically a free program. So yes, take advantage of it, absolutely. And Rick, what other things did I forget? 10 slides back.
Well, how much time do we have?
We are pretty much out of time. We've got a couple of minutes if there's any questions. We have 5 minutes for
And well, I'll also say that once the conference is over, the results book that has all the results, a lot of the insights, things like that, it's going to be posted on the website, and you could just
Yes, we have a 20-page detailed result book that we'll be publishing as well. It is published, and we're just waiting to hand it out. We give it out at the conference after we've announced the overall winners, because I learned the hard way that if we give it out beforehand, all of the top 20 will be poring over that thing trying to figure out if they're the overall winners. So I learned after watching them do that not to give it out to them until after. So that will be available. That's, on the website for free as well. So with the couple minutes that we have left, any questions about any of that?
going to come back there.
Yeah, back there, far in the back corner. Yes.
Yep. I'm an owner 30 out of Edmonton, Wisconsin. And just a question, do you have any strategies to help an owner operator to actually start growing and to the point of hiring drivers, owner operators, and start growing?
Yes, we do. Way more than what I can cover in this time. Come up to the front, we'll give you a card, and we can talk about it. Right in front with the cap on at the back.
When a company puts in a bid to be in the Best Fleets to Drive for, do they get results back after the whole process is done, whether they're nominated or not? Do you guys turn around and go, okay, here's where you're doing well, here's where you're doing
Yes. Do they see how they're doing? Yes. So there are some things they can see easily that they can pull out on their own. There is a detailed report that we have available. We do charge for that because it takes time for us to put it together, but we basically charge what it costs us at the time. And it can be anywhere from 40 to 90 pages of all of the results, comparison with everything, and their full driver survey. So some people do that every year just because it's a cheap driver survey for you. So yes, that is available, yeah.
But to get into the program, again, it's not that the company can decide, oh, we're going to join the program this year.
Right.
The driver has to nominate them. If no driver nominates them, we can't even start the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've seen some companies where the fleets have been nominated for buckets, going to evaluate each company here, that company.
If they say that they've been nominated, they're using a logo that says they were nominated as a best fleet. Yeah, so that means they started the program. They started going through the evaluation with us. So generally, when they get nominated, the first thing that happens is they will get an email that says, congratulations, you've been nominated. This person nominated you. Here's what they said. Here's your next steps. And at that point, they can start talking about it and telling everybody that they're nominated, and so they will do that. Very rarely is there somebody who gets nominated multiple years and doesn't do anything and just says, hey, we're nominated for 5 years. No real value if they don't go through their other steps of it. But that means somebody likes them, they've started the process, they're on their way. I mean, that on its own is something.
Now, sometimes though, when they're nominated, great, they're very excited, and then they get the questionnaire that the company has to fill out, and they hit the wall.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, this is way more detailed than we thought, and it takes a lot more time,
Yeah.
investment of resources to actually give fulsome answers. And so there are some.
Sometimes it takes them a couple of years to actually get all the way through it, and that's fine. Yeah.
I can see where there would be value to drivers that would look this up before looking for places to find employment.
Yeah.
Is that part of your website where they can look and say, hey, this is actually not too far away from where I live?
Yes, all of the current and past year winners are posted on the website, as are all of the results books from every year of the program. There's a ton of information on there, podcasts with the winners talking about what they're doing and why they do it that way. All of the past winners are there. Also, we are very militant about the use of this logo. Fleets are given specific logos as winners that they are allowed to use, and they are all basically threatened within an inch of their lives not to misuse those logos, because that logo needs to mean something. If you're a driver, you see that on the back of a truck, you need to be able to trust it. So we give them very specific logos. If they're using a generic version or whatever, it doesn't fly. It's one of those things.
Companies who have been in it for many years and who've been on that software list understand and have seen the value of it as a recruiting tool.
Yeah.
And so as soon as they hit nominating, as soon as they hit interviewed, they're on the phone with us. We want our logos. We want them now, because they understand as soon as they push those out, they're using it as a recruiting tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they will say, we have recruits sometimes every week come in and say, well, I saw that on your website, and I know at least, you know what, you've hit a certain threshold.
Yeah. Okay, I think that will bring us to the end. Forgot the one thing that I always forget. We actually have a booth here. We're over in, where are we?
6,000.
6. I'm only here for this. I'm terrible at this part of it. 64,186.
Sounds good.
We're in the 64,000s over in the west wing, Carrier's Edge booth. We're happy to talk more about this.
64168.
64168. 168. There we go. I just go over there and look for our booth. But we're happy to talk about it. We're here for the duration. We can talk about this forever. Thank you for sticking around, and enjoy the rest of the event.